The day my ex demanded half of my daughter's college fund was the day he accidentally destroyed the lie he'd been telling everyone for over a decade. 3 months later, he was standing in a courtroom trying to explain why dozens of social media posts, text messages, and witness statements contradicted everything he had sworn under oath. The judge wasn't impressed. Neither was our daughter. And watching the expression on his face when he realized his own greed had exposed him was one of the most satisfying moments of my life. But to understand why, you need to know how he disappeared in the first place. My name is Sarah, I'm 38 years old, and for most of my adult life I was a single mother, not by choice. When I met Jason, I was 23 and working as a receptionist at a dental office. He was charming, funny, confident, and seemed to know exactly what to say to make people feel special. Looking back, I realize he mostly knew what to say to get what he wanted. But at 23, I thought I'd found the man I was going to spend my life with. We got married after 2 years of dating. Our daughter Emma was born 18 months later. For a while, things seemed normal, not perfect, normal. Jason wasn't exactly an involved father, but plenty of new dads struggled with the adjustment. He complained about sleepless nights, rarely helped with feedings, and acted like changing a diaper deserved some kind of medal. Still, I kept telling myself he was trying. Then Emma turned 3. That's when everything changed. Jason started staying late at work, then later. Then overnight business trips started appearing out of nowhere. At first, I believed him. Then I noticed the inconsistencies. His stories stopped matching. Receipts appeared from places he claimed he hadn't visited. Friends accidentally mentioned seeing him when he supposedly was out of town. Deep down, I knew, I just didn't want to admit it. One Friday afternoon, Jason called me while I was picking Emma up from preschool. His voice sounded strangely calm, almost rehearsed. "Sarah, we need to talk when you get home." The second he said it, I knew. When I walked through our front door, 2 suitcases were sitting beside the couch. Jason was standing next to them. I remember Emma holding my hand and asking why Daddy packed his bags. I remember feeling like all the oxygen had disappeared from the room, and I remember the exact words he said. "I've met someone else." Just like that. No apology, no remorse, no attempt to explain, only a statement. As if he was informing me about the weather. I later learned the someone else was a 25-year-old woman he'd been seeing for nearly a year. A year. While I was raising our daughter and trying to save our marriage. The conversation lasted less than 20 minutes. He said he wasn't happy, he deserved a fresh start. He wanted to pursue a different life. Then he left. What I didn't realize at the time was that he wasn't only leaving me. He was leaving Emma too. At first he promised he would stay involved. Every divorced parent says that. "I'll always be there for my child. We'll figure out a schedule. This doesn't change how much I love her." The usual script. For the first few weeks he actually made an effort. Then visits became less frequent. Phone calls became shorter, birthdays were missed, holidays were skipped, excuses multiplied, traffic, work, travel, emergencies. Eventually, months passed without any contact at all. Emma would sit near the living room window waiting for him on weekends when he promised to visit. Sometimes she'd keep checking outside for hours. Every passing car made her hopeful. Every sunset made her disappointed. As a parent, there are few things more painful than watching your child learn that someone they love can't be trusted. The first time she stopped asking when Daddy was coming back, I cried myself to sleep. Because children shouldn't have to lower their expectations to protect themselves from heartbreak. But that's exactly what Emma learned to do. Meanwhile, Jason was busy building his new life. Through mutual friends and social media, I saw enough to understand what was happening. Vacations, parties, weekend trips, fancy restaurants, new cars, he had money for everything except child support. Naturally. Because according to Jason, he was always struggling financially whenever legal obligations appeared. Yet somehow never too broke for luxury vacations. Funny how that works. Over the years, I worked 2 jobs to support Emma. A full-time office position during the day. Bookkeeping work at night. There were months when I slept 4 or 5 hours, months when every dollar mattered, months when I skipped meals so Emma could participate in school activities. I never told her. Children shouldn't carry that burden. What mattered was that she felt loved, secure, and valued. And despite everything, she grew into an incredible young woman. Smart, kind, hardworking, resilient. Everything her father never bothered to notice. By the time Emma turned 15, Jason had become little more than a name on old paperwork. Years passed without meaningful contact. No birthday calls, no holiday visits, nothing. Then something unexpected happened. Emma earned acceptance into one of the best universities in the state, along with academic scholarships. The day the acceptance letter arrived, we celebrated with takeout pizza because that was still our favorite tradition. I thought the biggest challenge ahead would be helping her prepare for college. I was wrong, because somehow word of her college fund reached Jason, and after ignoring his daughter for over a decade, he suddenly remembered she existed. Unfortunately for him, his timing couldn't have been worse. The first message arrived on a Tuesday evening while I was helping Emma fill out scholarship paperwork. I almost didn't recognize the number. 12 years of minimal contact has a way of making someone feel like a stranger. When I opened the text, I immediately wished I hadn't. "Hey Sarah, heard Emma got into Westbridge University. Congratulations. We should probably discuss the college fund." I stared at the screen, then read it again, and again. Not because I didn't understand what he was saying, because I couldn't believe the audacity. For 12 years, Jason had treated our daughter like an optional responsibility. Now he was talking about the college fund as if he'd spent years contributing to it, as if he'd earned the right to discuss it, as if it belonged to him. I showed the message to Emma. She read it silently before handing my phone back. "That's the first time he's contacted you in almost a year, isn't it?" "Pretty much," she nodded. "Interesting timing." The disappointment in her voice hurt more than any anger would have. At 17, Emma had long since stopped expecting anything from her father. But that didn't mean his behavior stopped hurting. It simply meant she'd learned not to show it. I ignored the text. Then another arrived the next day. "I think it's important we talk. I have rights as her father." Rights. That word made me laugh, not because it was funny. Because it was absurd. Rights usually come with responsibilities. Jason had abandoned one while demanding the other. I ignored that message too. Then he called 3 times. Finally, I answered. "What do you want, Jason?" No greeting. No small talk, no pretending. His tone immediately shifted into something that sounded rehearsed. "I just think we should discuss Emma's future together." "Together?" "Yes." I nearly dropped the phone. "Jason, you've missed more birthdays than you've attended." "That's not fair." "No. I've always cared about Emma." I actually laughed, a cold, humorless laugh, because some lies are too ridiculous to take seriously. "Really? Then what's her favorite subject?" Silence. "What's her best friend's name?" More silence. "What instrument has she played since middle school?" Nothing. I could practically hear him scrambling. Finally, he cleared his throat. "That's not the point." "Exactly. Because he didn't know anything, not her interests, not her dreams, not her struggles, not the panic attacks she developed after years of wondering why her father didn't want her. Not the therapy sessions, not the nights she cried herself to sleep, not any of it because he wasn't there." "I heard you've saved quite a bit for college." There it was, the real reason for the call, not concern, not love, money. "Always money? What about it?" "Well, legally speaking, I should probably be involved in decisions regarding those funds." I almost hung up. Instead, I asked a question. "How much child support do you think you've paid over the last 12 years? Silence. "Because according to my records, you've missed payments so often that you still owe tens of thousands." His voice hardened immediately. "I knew you'd bring that up. Because it's relevant." "No, it's ancient history." "Ancient history. Apparently abandoning your child becomes ancient history when someone wants access to her money." The conversation ended shortly after. Or at least I thought it did. 3 days later, Emma received a friend request on social media from her father. Then came messages, lots of messages. At first, they seemed harmless. Questions about school, questions about college, questions about her plans. But Emma noticed something strange almost immediately. Every conversation eventually circled back to money. Scholarships, savings, college costs, financial aid, college fund balances, always money, never her. One evening, she walked into the kitchen holding her phone. "Mom." The expression on her face made my stomach drop. "What happened?" She handed me the phone. I read the latest message. "You know, technically your college fund belongs to both sides of the family. Your stepbrothers could really use some help too." I felt anger rise so quickly it made me dizzy. Stepbrothers, of course. Now it made sense. Jason had remarried years ago. His new wife had 2 sons. Both were approaching college age. And suddenly the daughter he'd ignored for over a decade had a college fund everyone wanted access to. Emma looked exhausted, not angry, not shocked, just tired. "I'm not crazy, right?" "No, he doesn't actually care about me." My heart broke. Because she wasn't asking for confirmation. She already knew. She just needed someone else to say it. I wrapped my arms around her. "No, sweetheart." Her voice cracked. "Why now?" That's the question every abandoned child asks eventually. Why now? Why after years of silence? Why after birthdays, graduations, achievements, and struggles? Why only when something valuable appears? I didn't know how to answer, so I told her the truth. "Because this isn't about you." The tears came immediately, not dramatic sobbing, the quiet kind, the kind that comes from old wounds reopening. "I think that's what hurts most." I understood exactly what she meant. Because indifference can hurt more than hatred. At least hatred acknowledges someone's existence. Indifference treats them like they're invisible. For 12 years, Jason had been indifferent. Now greed was making him pay attention. A week later, things escalated. I received a letter from an attorney. At first, I thought it had to be a mistake. Then I read it. Twice. The letter claimed Jason had been actively involved in planning for Emma's future and requested financial disclosures regarding educational savings accounts. I couldn't believe what I was reading. He wasn't just lying to us. He was putting those lies on legal documents. The man who forgot birthdays, the man who skipped graduations, the man who disappeared for years at a time, was now claiming active involvement. I called the attorney listed on the letter. What followed was one of the strangest conversations of my life, because within 5 minutes, it became painfully obvious that Jason had not told his lawyer the whole story. And once that lawyer started asking questions, everything began to unravel. The attorney's name was Michael Reynolds. By the end of our phone call, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because the poor man sounded like someone who had just realized he'd been handed a case built entirely on fantasy. The conversation started professionally enough. He introduced himself, explained that he represented Jason. Then he began asking questions that made it painfully clear he had been told a very different version of events. Mrs. Carter, my understanding is that Mr. Carter has maintained a consistent parental relationship with Emma over the years. I nearly choked on my coffee. Is that what he told you? A pause. Yes, I laughed, not because it was funny, because I genuinely didn't know how else to respond. The kind of laugh people make when reality becomes ridiculous. I'm going to ask you something, Mr. Reynolds. Of course. When was the last time Jason attended one of Emma's birthdays? Silence. When was the last time he came to a parent-teacher conference? More silence. When was the last time he spent Christmas with her? Nothing. I could practically hear the man taking notes. Then he asked carefully, do you have documentation regarding missed visitation and support obligations? I smiled. Because unlike Jason, I kept records. Lots of records, every missed payment, every ignored message, every canceled visit, every broken promise, for 12 years. Not because I plan to use them someday. Because raising a child alone teaches you to document everything, especially when the other parent can't be trusted. I have enough documentation to fill several filing cabinets. Another pause, a much longer one this time. Then came the question that changed everything. Mrs. Carter, approximately how much contact has Mr. Carter had with Emma over the last 5 years? I answered honestly. Maybe 6 phone calls. The silence afterward lasted so long I checked to make sure the call hadn't disconnected. Finally, he spoke. 6, maybe 7 if we're being generous. The man sounded physically exhausted, like someone regretting career choices in real time. The call ended shortly after, but something about his tone told me he was starting to understand exactly who his client was. Unfortunately for Jason, things got worse. Much worse. A few days later, Emma received another message, then another, then several more. At first, they focused on money. Then guilt entered the picture, classic manipulation. Family helps family. Your stepbrothers deserve opportunities too. It wouldn't be fair for one child to have everything. I've always tried my best as a father. That last one nearly made Emma throw her phone across the room. We were sitting in the living room when she showed me. I can't do this anymore. I looked at the messages, then at her. And for the first time in years, I saw genuine anger, not sadness, not disappointment. Anger, honestly, I was relieved. Because sadness hurts the person carrying it. Anger means they're finally recognizing they deserve better. What do you want to do? I asked. Emma stared at the screen. Then something shifted in her expression, a kind of calm determination. I want to tell the truth. The next morning, she sent a response. One message, nothing more, nothing less. It read, you weren't there when I learned to ride a bike. You weren't there when I got my driver's permit. You weren't there when I made honor roll. You weren't there when I graduated middle school. You weren't there when I cried because other kids asked why my father didn't love me. You don't get to disappear for 12 years and suddenly talk about family because you heard I have money. Then she blocked him. I don't think I've ever been more proud of my daughter. Not because she was cruel, because she was honest. For years, she'd carried pain that wasn't hers to carry. Now she was finally putting it back where it belonged. On him. What we didn't know was that Jason had already started spinning a very different story. A mutual friend called me a week later. Sarah, you need to see this. She sent screenshots, lots of screenshots, social media posts, comments, public messages. And every single one painted Jason as a devoted father being unfairly excluded from his daughter's life. According to his version of events, he had always wanted to be involved. I had turned Emma against him. I had refused visitation. I had poisoned their relationship. I had hidden information from him. Basically every excuse abandoned parents use when reality becomes inconvenient. The problem? The internet believed him, at least initially. People left supportive comments, called him brave, praised him for fighting for his daughter. Some even criticized me. A woman they'd never met, based entirely on his version of events. I won't lie, it hurt. Not because strangers mattered, because seeing someone rewrite your child's suffering is infuriating. Emma handled it even worse. One evening she sat quietly scrolling through the posts. Then she looked up. Do people really think he's the victim? I didn't know what to say, because some people will believe the first story they hear, especially when it sounds emotional. Fortunately, facts don't care about emotional storytelling. And Jason had forgotten one very important detail. His lies only worked if nobody checked them. A month later, his attorney requested mediation. Normally, I would have agreed, but by then, something interesting had happened. Mr. Reynolds had withdrawn from the case. Officially, he cited professional reasons. Unofficially, I suspect discovering 12 years of documented neglect wasn't what he'd signed up for. Jason quickly hired another lawyer, one apparently willing to believe whatever story he was selling. That turned out to be a mistake, because the new attorney pushed aggressively, demanded records, demanded disclosures, demanded access to financial information, and every demand created more opportunities for us to present evidence. Evidence Jason desperately hoped nobody would see. Then came the biggest surprise of all. A former friend of Jason's reached out to me, someone who had known him for years, someone who was tired of staying silent, and what he had to share would completely destroy Jason's carefully crafted image. Because it turned out Jason had been telling the truth about one thing. He had talked about Emma over the years, just not in the way any decent father would. The former friend's name was Mark. I hadn't spoken to him in nearly a decade. Back when Jason first left, Mark had been part of the same friend group. Over time, everyone drifted apart, and eventually I stopped hearing about him altogether. So when his name appeared in my inbox, I was surprised. When I read his message, I was stunned. "Sarah, I think you deserve to know what's being said. I've kept quiet for years because I didn't want to get involved, but after seeing Jason's posts about being a devoted father, I can't stay silent anymore." Attached were screenshots. Dozens of them. Some were old group chats. Others were social media conversations. A few were messages exchanged privately between friends. The more I read, the sicker I felt. Because while Jason had spent years publicly claiming he missed his daughter and wanted a relationship with her, his private conversations told a completely different story. In one message from years earlier, someone had asked if he planned to visit Emma for her birthday. Jason's response was only 4 words, "Not worth the drive." I stared at the screen. Then read it again, "Not worth the drive, my daughter." The little girl who used to sit by the window waiting for him. The little girl who cried herself to sleep wondering what she'd done wrong. Not worth the drive. I felt physically ill. Then it got worse. Another message showed Jason complaining about child support, not because he couldn't afford it, because he didn't think Emma deserved it. One sentence stood out. "Why should I fund a kid I barely know?" I had to put my phone down. For years, I'd protected Emma from the ugliest parts of the situation. I never wanted her to feel unwanted. Never wanted her to carry his failures, but reading those words made something click. She wasn't the one who should feel ashamed. He was, the messages continued. Vacation photos posted during months he claimed financial hardship. Conversations about expensive purchases, discussions about new cars, weekend trips, luxury hotels. All while court records showed missed support payments. The hypocrisy was staggering. But one screenshot stood above all the others, a conversation from 2 years earlier. Someone mentioned Emma receiving academic awards. Jason responded, "Good for her, maybe she'll become rich and pay me back for all the money I've wasted." The room went completely silent. Even after all the lies, even after all the neglect, I still wasn't prepared for that, because it revealed something important. Jason didn't see parenthood as a responsibility. He saw it as a transaction. Everything was about what he got in return, and if there wasn't a benefit for him, he lost interest. Suddenly, his obsession with the college fund made perfect sense. It wasn't about helping Emma. It never was. It was about access to money, always money. I spent 2 days debating whether to show Emma. Part of me wanted to protect her. Another part knew she deserved the truth. In the end, she made the decision for me. She noticed something was bothering me. "Mom, what happened?" I hesitated, then handed her my phone. She read everything, every message, every screenshot, every cruel comment. I watched her face carefully, waiting for tears, waiting for heartbreak, waiting for anger. Instead, something unexpected happened. She looked relieved, actually relieved. "That's it," I blinked. "What do you mean?" She handed the phone back. "For years I thought maybe it was my fault." My heart broke instantly. "Emma, no, listen." Her voice was calm, steady. "I kept wondering if maybe I wasn't interesting enough, smart enough, good enough." I couldn't speak, because every abandoned child asks those questions eventually, even when they shouldn't, especially when they shouldn't. Emma looked toward the window. "I spent years trying to figure out what was wrong with me." A tear finally escaped. "But there wasn't anything wrong with me." "No," I whispered. "There wasn't." She nodded slowly. "He's just selfish." And there it was, the truth, simple, painful, accurate. Not every villain is dramatic. Sometimes they're simply selfish enough to hurt everyone around them. That night, for the first time in years, Emma seemed lighter, not happier, freer, because uncertainty had finally been replaced by clarity. The next major development happened about 3 weeks later. Jason officially filed legal paperwork, and that's when his greed crossed from irritating into catastrophic. The filing claimed several things. First, that he had maintained an active parental relationship. False. Second, that he had significantly contributed to Emma's future educational planning. False. Third, that he had a financial interest in certain educational savings assets. Completely false. His attorney had apparently decided to throw every argument at the wall and hope something stuck. Unfortunately for them, evidence exists. And evidence is remarkably stubborn. When our attorney reviewed the filing, she actually laughed. Then she asked a question. Does he realize discovery works both ways? I smiled, because Jason clearly didn't. See, once the legal process started, both sides could request records. Financial records, communications, documentation, statements, evidence. And unlike Jason, we had years of it. What we didn't realize was how badly discovery would hurt him. Because while digging through records, our attorney uncovered something interesting. Then another thing. Then several more things. By the end of the month, Jason's financial situation looked very different from the story he'd been telling courts for years. Very different. Remember all those missed child support payments? The ones he blamed on financial hardship. Turns out hardship is difficult to claim when you're posting photos from luxury resorts. Hardship becomes even harder to claim when bank records tell a different story. And once those records entered evidence, the entire case began collapsing. Fast. Then came the final blow. A piece of evidence nobody expected. Not me, not Emma, not even our attorney. Evidence that would destroy Jason's credibility so completely that the judge would later call it deeply concerning. And ironically, Jason created that evidence himself, by trying to brag. If there's one thing I've learned about selfish people, it's that they eventually become victims of their own ego. Jason was no exception. For years, he had gotten away with rewriting history. He told friends what happened. He told family what happened. He told new acquaintances what happened. And because most people never bothered checking, his version became reality, at least in his mind. The problem with lying for that long is that eventually you forget which lies you've told. And Jason had told so many that he stopped being careful. The evidence that ultimately destroyed him wasn't hidden in some secret account. It wasn't buried in old paperwork. It wasn't uncovered by private investigators. It was sitting publicly online, posted by Jason himself. Our attorney found it while reviewing social media records. The moment she called me, I knew something significant had happened. She sounded excited, very excited. "Sarah," she said, "you need to come to my office." "What happened?" "I think your ex just lost his case." An hour later, I was sitting across from her desk. She slid a folder toward me. Inside were screenshots, hundreds of screenshots, years worth. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then she pointed to specific dates, and everything clicked. There were posts from years earlier where Jason bragged about not having parental responsibilities anymore. Posts where he joked about his freedom. Posts where he celebrated moving across the country because, in his words, he was finally living for himself. One post made my jaw drop. It had been written shortly after he stopped seeing Emma regularly. The caption read, "Best decision I ever made, no more obligations, no more being tied down." Attached was a photo of him on a beach holding a drink. The date matched a weekend he had promised Emma he would visit. A weekend she spent sitting by the front window waiting for him. I felt sick, then angry, then strangely calm, because suddenly everything was undeniable. No explanations. No excuses. No misunderstandings. Just his own words. But it got even better, or worse depending on your perspective. Over the years, Jason had repeatedly posted complaints about child support, not private complaints. Public complaints, the kind that stay online forever. One post read, "Can't believe I'm still paying for a kid I never see." The problem, court records showed he was the one choosing not to see her. Another post claimed, "My ex uses my daughter to control me." The problem, we had years of messages showing visitation offers, invitations, and attempts to maintain contact. Every lie collided directly with documented reality. Then our attorney showed me the most damaging post of all. A video. A stupid, arrogant, completely unnecessary video. Apparently, several years earlier, Jason had attended a party with friends. During the gathering, someone jokingly asked if he missed being a dad. Jason laughed, actually laughed, then answered, "Miss it, I escaped." The room erupted with laughter. Someone handed him another drink, and the video ended. 20 seconds. That was all. 20 seconds that destroyed an entire narrative, because you can't spend years publicly celebrating your absence and then suddenly claim you were a devoted parent denied access. Those positions don't coexist. Not in court, not under oath, not anywhere. When Emma saw the video, I worried about how she'd react. Instead, she surprised me. Again, she watched it once, then quietly handed my phone back. "He's pathetic." There was no sadness anymore. No hope, no disappointment, only clarity. And honestly, that was probably worse for him, because anger means someone still cares. Indifference means they've moved on. Jason wasn't losing a legal argument anymore. He was losing his daughter permanently. The court hearing was scheduled 6 weeks later. By then, the case had transformed completely. Originally, Jason wanted access to information about the college fund. Now his own conduct was becoming the focus. Support arrears, false statements, contradictory evidence, misrepresentations. The more documents appeared, the uglier things became. Our attorney estimated that he owed tens of thousands in unpaid support, possibly more with interest. When that figure was presented, Jason's legal team suddenly became much less aggressive. Funny how that happens. But the real disaster came during deposition. For anyone unfamiliar, a deposition is essentially sworn testimony before trial, and Jason made a fatal mistake. He assumed nobody could prove he was lying. So he lied repeatedly. He claimed regular contact. We had records. He claimed active involvement. We had records. He claimed financial hardship. We had records. Every answer created another contradiction, another inconsistency, another problem. By the end of the deposition, our attorney looked almost embarrassed for him. The final question was devastating. "Mr. Carter, did you ever describe your departure from your parental responsibilities as an escape?" Jason immediately said no, confidently, without hesitation. Then they showed him the video. The silence that followed reportedly lasted almost 30 seconds. 30 seconds, under oath, with everyone in the room staring at him. According to the transcript, his eventual response was, "I don't remember the context," which is lawyer language for, "I got caught." After that, the outcome became increasingly obvious. Even his own attorney seemed frustrated. Settlement discussions began almost immediately. But for the first time in his life, Jason was discovering something important. Not every problem can be escaped, and this one was about to cost him far more than money. Because while the legal consequences were serious, the personal consequences were about to become permanent. The settlement offer arrived 2 weeks before the hearing. It was exactly what you'd expect from someone like Jason. Not an apology, not accountability, not remorse. A deal. He wanted everything to disappear, quietly, conveniently, for him. According to the proposal, he would withdraw all claims regarding Emma's college fund if we agreed not to pursue certain financial penalties related to his unpaid child support. When our attorney finished explaining the offer, I just stared at her. "He's serious," she nodded. "Very." I almost laughed. After everything he'd done, he still thought this was a negotiation. As if 12 years of neglect could be balanced against a financial compromise. As if Emma's childhood was some kind of accounting error. The answer was simple. No, absolutely not. Our attorney rejected the offer. The hearing moved forward, and Jason finally had to face consequences. The courtroom wasn't dramatic the way television shows portray them. No surprise witnesses, no screaming, no emotional speeches, just facts, cold, documented facts. And facts are remarkably difficult to argue with. The judge reviewed years of records, missed payments, missed visits, missed birthdays, missed obligations. Then came the social media evidence, the messages, the screenshots, the video, the contradictions, the deposition transcript. At one point, the judge removed his glasses and simply stared at Jason. Not angry, not emotional, just disappointed. Honestly, that looked worse, because disappointment implies expectations. And somehow Jason had still managed to fall short. When his attorney attempted to argue that Jason had always intended to maintain a relationship with Emma, the judge immediately referenced the evidence. Particularly, the escape video. The expression on Jason's face was priceless. For years, he had controlled the narrative. Now he couldn't control anything. The judge eventually delivered his ruling. Jason had no claim whatsoever to Emma's college fund. None. Zero. The request was denied entirely. Then came the financial issues. The court confirmed years of unpaid support obligations, including accumulated interest. The final amount was substantial, substantially larger than Jason expected. His face turned pale as the numbers were read aloud. For the first time, he looked genuinely frightened. And honestly, I felt nothing, no satisfaction, no anger, no triumph, just exhaustion. Because no amount of money gives a child back the years they lost. Then something unexpected happened. As people began leaving the courtroom, Jason approached us, specifically Emma, his daughter, the daughter he'd ignored for most of her life. For a brief moment, I wondered if he was finally going to apologize. Maybe the courtroom had humbled him. Maybe consequences had forced self-reflection. Maybe, no, I should have known better. His first words were, "Emma, you know this isn't how I wanted things to happen." Emma looked at him, quietly, patiently, waiting. Then he said, "Your mother made everything harder than it needed to be." There it was, the blame, always someone else's fault, always. I watched something change inside Emma, not dramatically, not emotionally, just permanently. She looked directly at him, and for the first time in her life, she spoke to him as an adult, not a child hoping for love, not a daughter seeking approval, an adult seeing reality clearly. "You know what's funny?" Jason blinked. "What?" Emma's voice remained calm, steady, controlled. "I spent years wishing you'd come back." The hallway became silent, completely silent. "I thought if I got better grades, you'd care." Jason said nothing. "I thought if I worked harder, you'd notice me." Nothing. "I thought if I was good enough, you'd finally want to be my dad." His face started changing. For the first time, real discomfort appeared, not because he felt guilty, because he realized where the conversation was going. Emma continued. But then I grew up. A tear rolled down her cheek. Only one, she didn't wipe it away. And eventually I realized something. Jason swallowed. What? Emma smiled sadly. The problem was never me. Silence, heavy silence. The kind that settles over people when truth finally arrives. Then she said the sentence that ended everything. I don't hate you anymore. Jason looked relieved for half a second, then she finished. I just don't need you. I've never seen someone's face collapse so completely. Because hatred still leaves a connection. Love leaves a connection. Even anger leaves a connection. But indifference? Indifference means the story is over. For years, Jason convinced himself he could return whenever it was convenient. Whenever he wanted, whenever he needed something. That door no longer existed. His daughter had closed it. And unlike him, she wasn't coming back. 6 months later, Emma left for college. The college fund remained untouched except for her education. Exactly as intended. She earned scholarships, made friends, thrived. Every semester she sent me photos of new experiences, new achievements, and new opportunities. She was building a life, a wonderful one, without him. As for Jason, the financial judgments followed him for years. Some friendships disappeared after people learned the truth. Family members who believed his stories discovered the evidence. His reputation never fully recovered. But those weren't the real consequences. The real consequence was much simpler. One day, years from now, he'll probably wonder why his daughter never calls, why she never visits, why he isn't included in milestones, why he's missing from wedding photos, why he never meets future grandchildren, and he'll probably tell himself he's the victim. People like Jason usually do, but the truth is much simpler. He spent 12 years teaching his daughter that she couldn't depend on him. Eventually, she learned the lesson, and once she did, she never needed him again. A year after the court case ended, I was sitting in my kitchen drinking coffee when my phone buzzed. It was a picture from Emma. She was standing in front of a university building, smiling so hard her eyes were nearly closed. In one hand she held a certificate, in the other she held a scholarship award. The caption simply said, "Guess who just got offered a paid internship?" I smiled immediately. Then I started crying, not because of the internship, because moments like that reminded me how far she'd come. For years, I'd worried about what Jason's abandonment would do to her. I worried she'd carry that pain forever. I worried she'd doubt herself. I worried she'd think she wasn't worthy of love. Instead, she had become stronger than either of us imagined. Not because of what happened to her, because of how she responded to it. She refused to let someone else's failure define her future. And watching that happen was one of the greatest privileges of my life. A few weeks later, Emma came home for a holiday break. We spent the evening talking about classes, professors, friends, and campus life. Then she mentioned something I wasn't expecting. Grandma called me. I looked up, Jason's mother. We hadn't spoken much since the court case, not because we hated each other. Because she'd spent years believing Jason's version of events. The evidence had changed that, apparently dramatically. How'd it go? Emma shrugged. She apologized. That surprised me. Really? She nodded. She said she should have asked more questions years ago. I stayed quiet. Because that was probably true. One of the saddest lessons I've learned is that people often accept the easiest story, especially when it comes from someone they love. Questioning family is uncomfortable. Believing them is easier. Unfortunately, reality doesn't care what's easier. Reality remains reality. According to Emma, her grandmother cried during the conversation, not because of the court case, because she realized how many years she'd lost. Years she could have spent building a relationship with her granddaughter. Years she spent believing lies instead. The apology didn't erase anything, but it mattered. Because unlike Jason, she took responsibility. That alone made her better than him. Over the following months, more people learned the truth. Former friends, extended relatives, old acquaintances. The social media narrative Jason had built for years slowly collapsed. Not because anyone attacked him, because evidence existed, and evidence is stubborn. One relative reached out to me and said something I'll never forget. I always wondered why he had excuses for everything. That sentence perfectly described Jason. Excuses, always excuses, never accountability, never responsibility, never ownership, just excuses. The interesting thing about excuses is that they only work until facts appear. Once facts arrive, excuses become stories, and stories stop protecting you. As for Jason himself, life became increasingly complicated. The financial judgments from the court didn't disappear. The unpaid support obligations remained. Interest continued accumulating. Several expensive lifestyle choices suddenly became impossible. Vacations became less frequent. Luxury purchases became less common. The consequences he'd avoided for years finally caught up with him, and apparently he wasn't handling it well. We learned this indirectly through mutual acquaintances, not because we were tracking him. Because people talk, especially when someone spends years portraying themselves as a victim before getting exposed. One story stood out. According to a former friend, Jason spent an entire evening complaining that everyone had turned against him. Nobody trusted him anymore. Nobody believed him anymore. Nobody sympathized with him anymore. When I heard that, I found myself laughing, not because his situation was funny, because of the irony. For years, Emma experienced exactly that feeling. Nobody understood her pain. Nobody saw her struggle. Nobody knew what she was carrying. Now Jason was getting a tiny glimpse of what isolation felt like. The difference. His isolation was self-inflicted. Emma's wasn't. Then came perhaps the most satisfying update of all. About 18 months after the court case, Emma called me late one evening. She sounded amused, very amused. "Mom, guess who emailed me?" I already knew, because there was only one person it could be. "Your father?" "Yep." Apparently Jason had sent a lengthy message, several pages long, part explanation, part excuse, part attempt at reconciliation. According to Emma, the email contained all the classics. He'd made mistakes. Life had been complicated. People had influenced him. Circumstances were difficult. He wished things had gone differently. Not once did he actually take responsibility. Not once did he plainly say, "I abandoned you." Because accountability requires honesty, and honesty had never been Jason's strength. "What are you going to do?" I asked. Emma laughed. Then she read me her entire response. 3 sentences, only 3. "I hope you find peace with the choices you've made. I have. Please don't contact me again." That was it. No insults, no arguments, no revenge, no anger. Just closure, complete closure. After she sent it, she blocked the address. Conversation over. Relationship over. Chapter closed, permanently. The thing that struck me most wasn't what she wrote. It was how little emotion remained behind it. Years earlier, that email would have shattered her. Now, it barely interrupted her evening. That's what healing looks like sometimes. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Simply reaching a point where someone no longer has power over your happiness. The final update came 2 years after Emma started college. She graduated near the top of her class. The ceremony was beautiful. Friends attended, professors attended, family attended, people who loved her attended. There were photographs. Celebrations, speeches, laughter, pride, everything a graduation should be. There was one empty seat in the audience, a seat nobody had reserved, a seat nobody expected to be filled, a seat representing a man who spent years believing he'd always have another chance. Another birthday, another holiday, another conversation, another opportunity, until eventually there weren't any left. That day, as I watched my daughter walk across the stage, I realized something. Jason thought the worst consequence would be money, court orders, judgments, debt. He was wrong. The worst consequence was absence. He missed her childhood. He missed her milestones. He missed her victories. He missed watching her become the incredible woman she grew into. And unlike money, those moments can never be repaid. They can never be recovered. They can never be earned back. Once they're gone forever. As we took family photos after the ceremony, Emma slipped her arm around my shoulders and smiled. "Ready, Mom?" I looked at the camera, then at my daughter, the daughter who survived abandonment, the daughter who built a future anyway, the daughter who proved that someone's rejection does not determine your worth. And I smiled. Because in the end, the person who lost everything wasn't the child who was abandoned. It was the parent who chose to walk away.